The producers of Jimmy Kimmel Live were running through their final checks just 3 hours before the show. The head producer, Tom, paced back and forth in the control room, coffee in hand, going over the night's lineup one more time. It was meant to be a special episode focusing on tech innovation, with Elon Musk as the headline guest. "Is Elon's team here yet?" Tom asked his assistant. "They just called." "There's been a change of plans," the assistant replied, looking a bit nervous. "Elon is bringing his son with him." Tom nearly spilled his coffee. "His son? Which one?" X, the young one. The control room went silent. Having a child, especially one as young as X, on a late-night talk show wasn't exactly standard procedure. Late-night shows were filmed in the evening, often with adult humor and topics not always suitable for children. Plus, Jimmy's interview style was unpredictable. That was part of his charm. But it also meant they needed to pivot quickly. "Does Jimmy know?" Tom asked. "Not yet. I was just about to tell him." Tom sighed and put down his coffee. "I'll tell him. We need to rework some of the questions and maybe cut that political joke segment." Down the hall, Jimmy Kimmel was in his office reviewing his notes for the Elon interview. He had prepared several jokes about Twitter, now called X, and Elon's various controversies. When Tom knocked and entered, Jimmy could tell by his face that something was up. "What is it?" "Don't tell me Elon canceled," Jimmy said, looking up from his notes. "No, he's still coming, but he's bringing his son X with him." Jimmy raised his eyebrows. "Well, that's unexpected. How old is he now? 7? "About that, yes," Tom confirmed. "We'll need to adjust some of your questions. The politics bit definitely needs to go, and maybe we tone down the Twitter takeover jokes." Jimmy nodded, already thinking about how to adapt. Unlike his carefully crafted monologues, interviews required flexibility, especially when surprise elements were thrown in. Having a child on the show would change the dynamic completely, but it might also create some genuinely heartwarming moments. If there was one thing Jimmy knew from his years of hosting, it was that kids were unpredictable in the best possible way. "Let's go with it," Jimmy decided. "I can work with this. Let's focus more on SpaceX, the cool stuff kids would like. Maybe ask about what X thinks of rockets and Mars. Keep it light, fun." While the show's team scrambled to adjust across town, Elon Musk was dealing with his own unexpected situation. He hadn't originally planned to bring X to the show, but a last-minute change with his childcare arrangements left him with few options. "Are you excited to see the TV show?" Elon asked X as they sat in the back of the Tesla on their way to the studio. X nodded, looking up from his tablet. "Will there be lots of people?" "Yes, quite a few," Elon replied. "But you'll be sitting with me the whole time. Just remember what we talked about. It's okay to answer questions if Jimmy asks you something, but you don't have to if you don't want to." X returned to his tablet, seemingly unfazed by the situation. Elon smiled to himself. His son had always been remarkably composed for his age, showing a curiosity about the world that reminded Elon of himself as a child. Still, a late-night talk show was an unusual environment for a young boy. Elon felt a mixture of concern and pride. Concern about how the evening would unfold, but pride in sharing this experience with his son. Back at the studio, the audience was beginning to file in, unaware of the change to the night's program. The warm-up comedian was doing his usual routine, getting everyone energized for the show. Behind the scenes, the stage manager was making last-minute adjustments to the seating arrangement, adding a slightly higher chair next to the guest seat for X. The makeup artist approached Jimmy as he was getting ready. "I heard the news. That's going to be interesting." Jimmy chuckled. "That's one way to put it. I've interviewed plenty of kids before, just not usually at 10 p.m. alongside their billionaire fathers." "You'll do great," she assured him as she finished up. "Kids love you." Jimmy wasn't so sure about that. While he had his own children and generally got along well with kids, interviewing them on live television was always unpredictable. Some clammed up entirely, while others said things so unexpected that the censors had to scramble for the bleep button. In the green room, Elon's assistant was going through the final details with the show's coordinator. "Mr. Musk would prefer if you avoid any questions about his ex-partners or family disputes," the assistant explained. "And obviously, please be mindful that his son will be present." "Of course," the coordinator nodded. "Jimmy's great with kids. We've adjusted the segments to make them more family-friendly." As showtime approached, the energy in the building shifted from preparation to performance mode. Camera operators took their positions, Sound technicians made final adjustments, and the band ran through their intro music one last time. In the green room, Elon was helping X fix his small tie. He had insisted on dressing up for the occasion, choosing a miniature version of a suit, not unlike what his father often wore to important meetings. "Remember, it's just a conversation," Elon told his son, "just like when we talk to people who visit our house, except there will be cameras." X nodded solemnly, showing a maturity beyond his years. "I know, Dad, I've seen your interviews on my tablet." Elon raised an eyebrow, surprised and a little amused. "Have you now? Well, just be yourself. That's all anyone can ask." A production assistant knocked on the door. "5 minutes, Mr. Musk." The assistant led them through the backstage area, a maze of cables, equipment, and busy staff members rushing to their positions. His eyes widened as he took in all the activity. It was a far cry from the sleek, minimalist environments of his father's companies that he was used to visiting. In the control room, Tom watched the monitors as Jimmy began his opening monologue. The audience was responding well, laughing at all the right moments. So far, so good. But the real test would come when Elon and X took the stage. "Camera 3, be ready for a wider shot when they come out," Tom instructed. "We want to capture both Elon and his son in the frame." As Jimmy finished his monologue and the band played, he announced, "My first guest tonight needs no introduction. He's the man behind Tesla, SpaceX, and X, formerly known as Twitter. And tonight he's brought a special guest with him. Please welcome Elon Musk and his son, X." The audience erupted in applause, a mixture of excitement for Elon and surprise at seeing his young son. As they walked onto the stage, Elon with his characteristic slight awkwardness and X with remarkable poise, the cameras captured the moment that would soon have the internet buzzing. Jimmy stood to greet them, shaking Elon's hand and then bending down slightly to shake X's hand as well. "Welcome, both of you. This is a first for our show. I don't think we've ever had a father-son duo quite like this before." As they all took their seats, the audience settled in, eager to see how this unusual interview would unfold. No one, not Jimmy, not the producers, and certainly not the viewers at home, could have predicted what was about to happen next. The stage was set for a television moment that would be replayed, shared, and talked about for weeks to come. The studio lights felt warm as Jimmy settled into his chair, turning toward his guests with a welcoming smile. The audience was still buzzing with excitement. Having both Elon Musk and his young son on the show was unexpected, creating an electric atmosphere of anticipation. "So, Elon," Jimmy began, leaning forward slightly, "thanks for joining us tonight. And I have to say this is a pleasant surprise." He gestured toward X, who was sitting perfectly straight in his slightly elevated chair, his feet dangling above the floor. "We don't often have guests your age on the show." X looked at Jimmy with curious eyes but remained quiet, observing everything around him with remarkable focus for a child his age. Elon smiled, placing a gentle hand on his son's shoulder. It was a last-minute change of plans. Sometimes being a single dad means bringing your kid to work, even when work is a late-night talk show. The audience laughed appreciatively, and Jimmy nodded. "I get it. I've had to bring my kids to work plenty of times, though usually not when I'm on camera." He turned his attention back to his planned questions. "So let's talk about some of your recent projects. There's been a lot happening with SpaceX lately." As Jimmy and Elon began discussing rocket launches and Mars missions, the cameras occasionally cut to X, who was listening intently. The production team had worried that a child might get bored or fidgety during an adult conversation, but X seemed genuinely interested, his eyes darting between his father and Jimmy as they spoke. "The latest Starship test was actually our most successful yet," Elon explained, his face lighting up with enthusiasm as he always did when discussing space travel. "We're getting closer to making life multiplanetary, which has always been the goal." Jimmy nodded, then glanced at X. "Do you think your son might be one of the first kids to visit Mars someday?" Before Elon could answer, X spoke up. "I want to," he said simply, his voice clear despite its childish pitch. The audience let out a collective "aww," charmed by the boy's first words on the show. Jimmy grinned, sensing an opportunity to include X more in the conversation. "Really? What interests you about Mars?" He thought for a moment, then replied, "It's red, and you can jump really high there." The audience laughed, delighted by the child's straightforward answer. Elon chuckled. "He's been learning about the planets. He knows that Mars has lower gravity than Earth. That's impressive knowledge for someone your age, Jimmy remarked, genuinely surprised. He decided to ask another question directly to X. Do you have a favorite planet? X didn't hesitate. Saturn. It has rings and lots of moons. The audience clapped, clearly enchanted by the boys' responses. In the control room, Tom gave a thumbs up to his team. The gamble of having a child on the show was paying off so far. Jimmy smoothly steered the conversation back to Elon's work. Speaking of space, there's been some news about your satellite internet service expanding to more rural areas. Can you tell us about that? As Elon launched into an explanation about bringing internet access to underserved communities, the camera operators made sure to keep both father and son in frame. They noticed that X was watching his father speak with obvious pride, occasionally glancing around at the studio setup with curiosity. During a brief pause in the conversation, X leaned over and whispered something in his father's ear. Elon listened, then smiled and nodded. Everything okay? Jimmy asked. Yes, Elon replied. He was just asking if the cameras are the same kind they use to film rockets taking off. He's very interested in the technical aspects of things. Jimmy raised his eyebrows, impressed. Well, they're not quite the same, but they're pretty advanced. He turned to X. Would you like to see how they work after the show? X nodded eagerly, his face lighting up. The first commercial break was approaching and Jimmy smoothly wrapped up their current topic. We'll be right back with more from Elon Musk and his son X after these messages. As the on-air light dimmed and the commercials began to play, Jimmy leaned forward. You're doing great, he said to X. Are you having fun? X nodded. It's interesting here. There are a lot more people than I thought. A production assistant hurried over with water for all three of them. Everything's going really well, she whispered to Jimmy. Social media is already blowing up about how cute this is. Jimmy took a sip of water and glanced at his notes for the next segment. He had planned to discuss some of Elon's more controversial business decisions, but with X sitting right there, he decided to pivot to some lighter topics instead. When they returned from the commercial break, Jimmy shifted gears. So, Elon, I understand you're quite the gamer in your spare time, what little of it you have. Do you ever play video games with X? Elon nodded. We do, actually. He's getting quite good at some of them, probably better than me already. What games do you like? Jimmy asked X directly. Minecraft, X replied without hesitation. I built a rocket in it. Of course you did, Jimmy laughed. Like father, like son. The audience chuckled warmly. He's actually quite creative, Elon added. He's designed some pretty impressive structures. Some of my engineers were impressed when I showed them. As the segment continued, X began to open up more, adding short comments to his father's answers or nodding along. The audience was clearly charmed by the dynamic between father and son, and Jimmy expertly kept the conversation flowing, making sure to include X without putting too much pressure on him. During one moment, when Elon was explaining a technical detail about electric vehicle batteries, X's attention drifted to the band setup on the side of the stage. The camera caught his wide-eyed fascination with the instruments. Jimmy noticed and took the opportunity for a natural transition. It looks like X is interested in our house band. Do you play any instruments? He asked the boy. X shook his head. Not yet, but I want to learn the piano. That's a great choice, Jimmy nodded. Music and science actually go hand in hand. A lot of scientists are also musicians. That's true, Elon agreed. There's a mathematical component to music that appeals to the same part of the brain that enjoys science and engineering. As the interview progressed, the tension in the control room had completely dissolved. What had started as a potential complication had turned into one of the most charming segments they'd had in months. Tom was already thinking about how they could clip this for their social media channels. We have a little tradition on the show, Jimmy said, reaching below his desk. For our younger guests, we usually have a little gift. He pulled out a small model rocket with the Jimmy Kimmel Live logo painted on the side. This is for you. X's eyes widened as he accepted the gift. Thank you, he said politely, examining the rocket with genuine interest. It's not as advanced as your dad's rockets, but we did our best, Jimmy joked. It's aerodynamic, X observed, turning the model in his hands and studying its shape. Elon looked slightly surprised at his son's comment, then smiled proudly. He knows more about rockets at his age than I do now, Jimmy quipped, and the audience laughed. The interview continued with a discussion about the future of electric vehicles. with X occasionally adding his own simple but surprisingly insightful comments. The production team had originally planned to keep the segment relatively short, concerned about how long a child could remain engaged on a late-night talk show, but X's composure and the natural flow of the conversation had them extending the time. As they approached the next commercial break, Jimmy decided to try something a bit different. X, I usually ask my adult guests some pretty tough questions, but I'm wondering if I could ask you something instead. X looked up from the rocket model he'd been examining and nodded. What do you think is the coolest thing your dad has ever made? It was a simple question, the kind that would typically elicit a cute, predictable answer from a child. The audience leaned forward slightly, expecting X to say something about rockets or electric cars. X thought for a moment, his young face serious as he considered the question. The studio was unusually quiet, everyone waiting for his answer. Little did they know that what X was about to say would create one of the most unexpected and memorable moments in the show's history, setting the stage for what would soon become a viral sensation across the internet. The studio fell silent as everyone waited for X's answer to Jimmy's question about the coolest thing his father had ever made. The production team watched from the control room, curious what the boy would say. Would he mention the rockets that soared into space? The electric cars that changed transportation? Or perhaps something more personal, like a toy his father had built for him? X looked thoughtful, his small fingers still holding the model rocket Jimmy had given him. When he finally spoke, his voice was clear and confident. Neural networks, he said. There was a beat of silence, then a ripple of surprised laughter from the audience. Jimmy's eyebrows shot up, and even Elon looked slightly taken aback. Neural networks? Jimmy repeated, clearly not expecting that answer from a 7-year-old. You mean like artificial intelligence? X nodded. They can learn things by themselves. Dad showed me how they work. They're like brains made of math. The audience's laughter transformed into sounds of amazement and applause. In the control room, Tom leaned forward in his chair, instantly recognizing they were witnessing an exceptional television moment. Brains made of math, Jimmy echoed, genuinely impressed. That's actually a pretty good description. He glanced at Elon. Did you coach him on that answer? Elon shook his head, looking both surprised and proud. No, he's just been around while I've been working on some AI projects. Kids absorb everything. Jimmy turned back to X. So, do you understand how neural networks work? Most adults would have expected a simple yes or no from a child, or perhaps a vague explanation. What happened next left everyone stunned. X straightened up in his chair and began explaining. They have layers of numbers that connect to each other. When you show them lots of examples, the connections get stronger or weaker, and that's how they learn patterns. It's kind of like how our brains learn. The audience fell completely silent, then erupted in applause. Jimmy sat back in his chair, momentarily speechless. Even Elon appeared surprised by the depth of his son's understanding. That's absolutely right, Elon confirmed, looking at his son with newfound appreciation. I didn't realize you'd picked up that much. Jimmy, recovering from his shock, leaned toward X. Have you been listening in on your dad's business calls or something? X shook his head. I just ask questions, and Dad explains things to me. He paused, then added, he never treats me like I'm too little to understand. The audience let out a collective awe, touched by the glimpse into Elon and X's relationship. That's a great approach to parenting. Jimmy nodded, genuinely impressed. Treating kids like they're capable of understanding complex ideas. He turned to Elon. Though I'm guessing most 7-year-olds aren't asking about neural networks. Elon smiled. He's always been curious. Last week he wanted to know how satellites stay in orbit, so we built a model to demonstrate centripetal force. When I was 7, Jimmy quipped, I was mainly curious about how many cookies I could eat before getting sick. The audience laughed. And what was the answer? He added with a grin. To the cookie question, I mean. 12, X replied without missing a beat. The audience roared with laughter and Jimmy nearly fell out of his chair. You've tested this theory? He asked through his own laughter. X nodded solemnly. It was for science. Even Elon was laughing now. That experiment happened at his grandmother's house. I was conveniently not informed until after the data was collected. As the laughter subsided, Jimmy decided to probe a bit further. So X, since you understand neural networks, what do you think about artificial intelligence? Does it worry you at all? It was a complex question, one that many adults struggled to form opinions on. The control room producers exchanged glances, wondering if the question might be too advanced. X considered the question carefully. "I think it depends on who builds it and why," he said finally. "Dad says powerful tools need careful rules." Jimmy nodded slowly, genuinely impressed by the thoughtfulness of the answer. "That's a really good point. The people building the technology and their intentions matter a lot." "He's right," Elon added. "The governance and ethical frameworks around AI are just as important as the technology itself. That's something I've been trying to emphasize in my companies." Jimmy turned back to X. "So what do you want to be when you grow up? Following in your dad's footsteps with rockets and AI?" X tilted his head slightly, considering the question. "I want to help people get to Mars, but I also want to protect Earth. Maybe both." The audience applauded again, clearly charmed by the boy's combination of ambition and concern for the planet. "That's a worthy goal," Jimmy nodded. "We definitely need both, exciting new frontiers and taking care of our home planet." He paused, then added with a smile, "Though I hope you'll find time for more cookie experiments along the way." X grinned, showing a missing tooth that reminded everyone that despite his remarkable vocabulary and understanding, he was still very much a child. As the segment continued, Jimmy decided to try a more playful approach. "I've got a little game I sometimes play with guests. I'll say a word and you say the first thing that comes to mind. Want to try?" X nodded eagerly. "Okay, first word, space." "Infinite," X replied immediately. "Robots." "Helpful." "School." X thought for a moment. "Sometimes boring." The audience laughed, appreciating the honest answer. "That's fair," Jimmy chuckled. "What about television?" "Loud," X said, glancing around at the bright studio. "And finally, Dad?" Jimmy asked with a nod toward Elon. X looked up at his father. "Genius, but also silly sometimes." The audience melted at the answer, and Elon's expression softened in a way that viewers rarely got to see from the usually serious entrepreneur. "I think that might be the most accurate description of me ever given," Elon admitted with a laugh. The chemistry between Jimmy, Elon, and X had created an unexpectedly heartwarming segment. In the control room, Tom was already getting messages from network executives praising the interview. As they prepared to go to commercial, Jimmy wrapped up the word association game. "You're really good at this, X. Maybe you should host the show sometime." "No, thank you," X replied politely. "It seems stressful." Jimmy burst out laughing. "You have no idea," he said, then turned to the camera. "We'll be right back with more from Elon and X Musk after this break." As the show went to commercial, the studio audience continued to buzz with excitement. Nobody had expected this level of articulation and charm from such a young guest. The production assistants brought fresh water and Jimmy leaned forward. "You're doing amazing," he told X. "Having fun?" X nodded. "It's not as scary as I thought it would be." "He was a bit nervous before we came on," Elon explained. "This is his first time on a show like this." "Well, you'd never know it," Jimmy replied. "Some adult guests are a lot more nervous than you are." The floor director signaled that they were coming back from commercial in 30 seconds. "So, for this next segment," Jimmy explained quickly to X, "we're going to talk a bit about some funny internet memes about your dad. Nothing too complicated, just some jokes people make online. Sound good?" X nodded. But there was a slight twinkle in his eye that Jimmy didn't quite catch. A hint that the young boy might have something unexpected up his sleeve. As the cameras began rolling again, Jimmy welcomed the audience back. "If you're just joining us, I'm here with Elon Musk and his son X, who has been surprising us with his knowledge of neural networks, space travel, and the precise number of cookies that can be eaten in one sitting." The audience laughed, and Jimmy reached for a tablet on his desk. "Now, Elon, you're pretty famous on the internet, and people make a lot of memes about you. I thought we could look at some of the funnier ones and get your reaction." He turned the tablet to show a harmless meme comparing Elon's ambitious timeline predictions to actual product release dates. "This one's pretty accurate," Elon admitted with a self-deprecating smile. "I tend to be a bit optimistic with timelines." "A bit?" Jimmy raised an eyebrow, getting another laugh from the audience. As they went through a few more light-hearted memes, X watched carefully, seemingly absorbing everything. Then Jimmy showed one that depicted Elon as a cartoon villain, plotting to take over the world with his various companies. This one's a bit more edgy, Jimmy commented. What do you think about people who worry that you have too much power with all your different companies? It was a more serious question, though still delivered in Jimmy's characteristically light tone. Before Elon could answer, X spoke up. Didn't you make the same joke about Amazon last week? He asked innocently. The audience gasped, then erupted in laughter. Jimmy's jaw dropped slightly, clearly caught off guard. Well, yes, I think I did make a similar joke about another tech company, Jimmy admitted, impressed by the child's observation. You watch this show? Sometimes, X replied. When Dad lets me stay up late enough. Jimmy turned to Elon with mock accusation. You let your son watch late-night comedy? Elon shrugged with a smile. Only the good parts. The audience was in stitches now, and Jimmy was clearly delighted by the unexpected turn the conversation had taken. What had started as a simple interview had evolved into something far more entertaining, and it was all because of a 7-year-old boy who was proving to be just as quick-witted as the adults around him. The studio was still echoing with laughter from X's unexpected observation about Jimmy's previous jokes. Jimmy, a seasoned professional who had interviewed presidents, movie stars, and some of the world's most famous personalities, found himself genuinely caught off guard by the 7-year-old sitting across from him. So you've been paying attention to my show, Jimmy said, recovering with a grin. I'm flattered. Most kids your age are watching cartoons. X shrugged slightly. I like cartoons too. But your show is funny sometimes. Sometimes, Jimmy repeated, raising an eyebrow in mock offense. Only sometimes? The audience laughed again, and even Elon was smiling broadly, clearly enjoying seeing this unexpected side of his son on display. What could I do to make it funnier? Jimmy asked, playing along. X thought for a moment, his expression serious. Maybe more science jokes? Science jokes? Jimmy echoed, glancing at the audience. I'm not sure how well those would go over with our regular viewers. I don't know, Elon chimed in. I think there's an untapped market for quantum physics humor. Okay, fine, Jimmy said, accepting the challenge. How about this one? Why can't you trust atoms? X tilted his head, waiting for the punchline. Because they make up everything, Jimmy delivered with exaggerated enthusiasm. There was a beat of silence, then X gave a small smile. That's actually pretty good. The audience broke into applause and laughter. Not just at the joke, but at the endearing interaction between the host and his young guest. In the production booth, Tom was frantically signaling to his team. Make sure we're getting all of this. This is gold. Social media coordinators were already preparing clips to post online as soon as possible. Jimmy decided to keep the playful momentum going. Do you know any science jokes, X? X nodded, sitting up straighter in his chair. Why don't scientists trust atoms? Jimmy furrowed his brow, realizing it sounded like the same joke he'd just told. Because they make up everything? No, X replied, his face completely serious. Because they have too many electrons. There was a moment of confusion before the audience got the wordplay. Too many electrons, sounding like too many lies. The laughter started slowly, then built as people realized what had happened. Jimmy's jaw dropped, then he burst out laughing. He just set me up, he exclaimed, pointing at X in disbelief. A 7-year-old just set me up for a joke. Elon looked just as surprised as everyone else. I did not teach him that, he said, shaking his head with a laugh. Where did you learn that joke? Jimmy asked, still chuckling. From a book about science jokes, X explained simply. I like jokes that make you think. That was brilliant, Jimmy admitted, genuinely impressed. I've been doing comedy for decades, and I just got played by a first grader. The audience was loving every moment of this unexpected exchange. What had started as a potentially risky interview with a child had transformed into one of the most memorable segments in recent show history. As the laughter subsided, Jimmy decided to push his luck a little further. Okay, so you're smart, you're funny. Is there anything you're not good at, X? X thought for a moment, then answered with complete honesty. Drawing horses. They always look wrong. The simple, candid answer sent another wave of laughter through the studio. There was something refreshingly authentic about a child who could discuss neural networks 1 minute and admit to struggling with drawing horses the next. I can't draw horses either, Jimmy confessed. Actually, I can't draw much of anything. That's why I went into comedy. The show's director signaled that they needed to wrap up the segment soon, But Jimmy was reluctant to end what had become such an entertaining interview. "Before we go, I wanted to ask you one more thing, X," Jimmy said. "Your dad is famous for posting a lot on social media. Do you ever help him with that?" It was meant as a light-hearted question. Nobody expected the answer that followed. X glanced up at his father, then back at Jimmy. "Sometimes he shows me what he wants to post, and I tell him if it might make people mad." The audience erupted in laughter, and even the crew members off camera could be heard chuckling. The comment hit particularly close to home, given Elon's notorious history of controversial social media posts. Jimmy nearly fell out of his chair. "So you're his impulse control?" "His social media editor," Elon laughed, taking the joke in good stride. "I should probably listen to him more often," he admitted. "He's usually right." "What's the worst post you've talked him out of?" Jimmy asked, sensing they were on the verge of comedy gold. X looked up at his father again, seemingly checking if it was okay to answer. Elon gave a small nod, still smiling. "There was one about a politician that wasn't very nice," X said carefully. "I told him it wasn't kind, and kind people don't say unkind things just because they can." The audience's reaction shifted from laughter to a collective awe, touched by the wisdom in the child's words. Even Jimmy seemed momentarily at a loss for words. Out of the mouths of babes, he finally said, genuinely moved, "That's actually really good advice for everyone, not just your dad." He turned to Elon. "I think your son might be the wisest person in your household." "No argument there," Elon agreed, looking at his son with undisguised pride. As the segment came to a close, Jimmy addressed the audience. "We have to take a break, but when we come back, we'll have more with Elon and Musk. Don't go away." The moment the cameras stopped rolling, the studio exploded with activity. Production assistants rushed to bring water, makeup artists came forward for touch-ups, and the show's social media team was already working frantically on their phones. "This is blowing up online," one of them told Tom in the control booth. "The clips we posted from the first segment already have hundreds of thousands of views, and they've only been up for minutes." Meanwhile, on stage, Jimmy leaned forward. "You are incredible," he told X. "I interview adults for a living, and most of them aren't half as interesting as you are." X smiled shyly, seeming pleased but a bit overwhelmed by the praise. "Are you doing okay?" Elon asked his son quietly. "We can stop if you're getting tired." X shook his head. "I'm having fun." During the commercial break, phones were lighting up across the country. People who had been watching the show live were texting friends and family, telling them to turn on their TVs immediately. Social media platforms were buzzing with clips and quotes from the interview, with comments ranging from amazement at X's intelligence to delight at his unexpected comedic timing. One clip in particular was spreading, faster than the others, the moment when X had turned Jimmy's own comedic style back on him by referencing his previous jokes about tech companies. Hashtags like "Our Kid Genius X" and "Our Brilliant Muscujar" were trending, and media outlets were already reaching out to the show's publicists for permission to use the clips in their morning broadcasts. As the show prepared to return from commercial, the energy in the studio had transformed completely. What had started as a potentially awkward accommodation for a guest's childcare situation had become the most talked-about late-night moment of the year. "We're back in 30 seconds, the floor director announced. Jimmy quickly reviewed his notes, making mental adjustments to his planned questions. The original interview outline had been abandoned in favor of following whatever natural and unexpected direction the conversation might take. "Final segment," he told X, "and you two have been amazing. Let's finish strong." As the cameras began rolling again, Jimmy welcomed the audience back with a grin. "If you're just joining us, you've missed one of the most incredible interviews we've ever had on this show. I've been thoroughly schooled by a 7-year-old who knows more about neural networks than I do, and has better comedic timing than most professional comedians." The audience applauded enthusiastically, and X gave a small, slightly embarrassed smile. "So, X," Jimmy continued, "we've talked about your dad's work. We've told some jokes. But I'm curious, if you could invent anything, what would it be?" It was a simple question, the kind often asked of children, usually eliciting cute answers about flying cars or robots that do homework. But by now, everyone knew better than to expect a typical response from X. The boy thought for a moment, his expression serious once again. "I would invent a machine that could understand exactly how people feel, so no one would ever be sad alone." The studio fell silent. The answer was unexpectedly deep and compassionate, revealing a level of emotional intelligence that matched the boy's academic understanding. Wow, Jimmy said, genuinely moved. "That's actually a beautiful idea." Even Elon seemed touched by his son's answer. "I think that might be the best invention idea I've ever heard," he said softly. The emotional moment was captured perfectly by the cameras, and in living rooms across the country, viewers found themselves unexpectedly moved by what had started as a simple late-night comedy interview. Little did anyone know that this interview, particularly the exchanges where X had demonstrated both intellectual brilliance and emotional wisdom beyond his years, would become one of the most viewed and shared television moments of the year. By morning, the clips would be playing on news programs, discussed on talk shows, and analyzed in articles about gifted children and the future of education. The interview that had begun as a logistical challenge had transformed into a career highlight for Jimmy Kimmel and a touching public glimpse into the relationship between one of the world's most famous entrepreneurs and his remarkably bright young son. By the time the sun rose over Los Angeles the next morning, the interview had taken on a life of its own. What had started as an ordinary late-night talk show segment had transformed into a cultural phenomenon overnight. The network's servers had nearly crashed from the traffic to their website, where clips of the interview were being viewed millions of times. In a downtown apartment, Lisa Chen, one of Jimmy Kimmel Live's producers, was already awake and scrolling through her phone in amazement. Every news outlet seemed to be covering the story. "Musk's son steals the show," read one headline. "7-year-old genius charms late night," proclaimed another. Her phone buzzed with a text from Tom, the head producer. "Have you seen the numbers? Biggest digital engagement we've ever had. Across the city, in a spacious modern home with large windows overlooking the Pacific, Elon Musk was making breakfast for X. Unlike most mornings, when they ate quickly before rushing off to school and work, today they sat together at the kitchen island, taking their time." Elon had already received dozens of messages about the interview, but he'd put his phone away to focus on his son. "How do you feel about last night?" Elon asked, sliding a plate of scrambled eggs across the counter. X considered the question while carefully cutting his food into neat sections. "It was fun," he said finally. "Jimmy was nice. You were amazing," Elon told him, his voice softer than the confident tone he used in business meetings and public appearances. "I knew you were smart and funny, but you surprised even me." X looked up. "Were you proud?" "Incredibly proud," Elon confirmed, reaching over to ruffle his son's hair. "But I'm proud of you every day, not just when you're on TV impressing millions of people." Meanwhile, in the Jimmy Kimmel Live offices, an emergency meeting had been called. The show's writers, producers, and digital team crowded into the conference room, all talking excitedly over each other. "Quiet down, everyone," Tom called, standing at the head of the table. "I know we're all excited about last night, but we need to be strategic about how we handle this. This is the biggest viral moment we've had in years." The social media director raised her hand. "We've already gained over 500,000 new followers across platforms since last night. The clip where X turns Jimmy's joke back on him has been viewed over 15 million times. And that's just on our official channels," added another team member. "The unofficial clips being shared are probably in the tens of millions by now." Jimmy, who had arrived a few minutes late, slipped into the room and took a seat at the table. Despite the early hour, he looked energized. "Well, I think it's safe to say I've found my replacement when I retire," he joked, getting laughs from the team. "Seriously though," Tom said, "we need to talk about follow-up. Every news program wants you on this morning to talk about the interview." Jimmy nodded. "I'll do a couple, but I don't want to overexpose this. It was a special moment and I don't want to cheapen it by talking about it to death." "Good call," Tom agreed. "What about a follow-up with Elon and X? People are already asking when they'll be back on the show." Jimmy thought for a moment. "Let's give it some time. This was a unique circumstance. I don't want to turn that kid into a regular TV personality. He should be allowed to just be a kid. Across town, in a modest apartment cluttered with education books and teaching materials, Dr. Rachel Winters, a specialist in gifted child education, was fielding calls from journalists. As one of the leading experts in her field, she had been contacted by several major networks to comment on the interview. Yes, "What you saw last night was quite extraordinary," she explained to a morning show producer on the phone. "It's not just that he's knowledgeable. Many children can memorize facts. What's remarkable is his ability to synthesize information, to make connections, and to communicate complex ideas in accessible ways." She paused, listening to the producer's next question. "No, I wouldn't use the word genius lightly. But what's clear is that he has been raised in an environment that encourages curiosity and critical thinking. The research shows that's often more important than innate ability." By midday, the discussion had expanded beyond just entertainment news. Education forums were buzzing with debates about how to foster similar intellectual development in children. Business publications were analyzing how Elon's parenting approach might relate to his leadership style. Psychology websites were publishing articles about the social and emotional development of highly intelligent children. In a quiet moment between meetings, Elon posted a simple message on his social media account. "Proud dad moment. Thanks to Jimmy Kimmel for being so kind to my son." The post quickly accumulated hundreds of thousands of likes and tens of thousands of comments, most of them overwhelmingly positive. Even people who had been critical of Elon in the past found themselves charmed by the genuine father-son relationship they had witnessed. Jimmy saw the post during a break in his day and replied with his own message. "The pleasure was all mine. Your son is extraordinary. Pretty sure he should be hosting and I should be building rockets." By early afternoon, Jimmy was sitting in a comfortable chair in his office, recording a podcast interview about the previous night's show. "I've been doing this a long time," he told the host. "And I've interviewed pretty much everyone, presidents, royalty, the biggest movie stars in the world. But I've never been more surprised or delighted than I was last night." "Were you nervous about having a child on the show?" the podcast host asked. Jimmy laughed. "Terrified. Late night is not typically kid-friendly territory. We had to rewrite a bunch of segments, cut some jokes, but it all worked out better than we could have imagined." "What was the moment when you realized this was going to be special?" Jimmy thought for a moment. It was when he started explaining neural networks. "I expected a cute, simple answer, rockets are cool or something like that. Instead, he gave this surprisingly accurate explanation of how artificial intelligence works. That's when I knew we were in for something different." Across social media, parents were sharing stories of their own children's surprising insights and wisdom. Teachers were posting about the importance of not underestimating young minds. The interview had sparked a broader conversation about childhood education and how adults communicate with children. At X's school, the principal had called an impromptu assembly to talk about the interview, using it as an opportunity to discuss how learning extends beyond the classroom. Many of X's classmates had watched him on TV, creating a potential for awkwardness. But the school counselor had worked with teachers to ensure he wouldn't be treated differently. When X returned to school the following day, his teacher, Ms. Powell, handled it perfectly. "Yes, X was on TV and that's exciting," she told the class. "But today we're all scientists exploring the water cycle, and everyone's discoveries are equally important." 1 week after the interview, the buzz had begun to subside, though the impact continued to ripple outward. Several educational organizations had reported increased interest in STEM programs for young children. Bookstores noted a spike in sales of science books for kids. Parenting forums were filled with discussions about how to encourage children's curiosity about complex topics. Elon had turned down dozens of requests for follow-up interviews and appearances. Despite his comfort with public attention, he was protective of his son's privacy and normalcy. He did, however, accept an invitation to speak at an education conference, where he shared some thoughts on raising curious children. "The key isn't to teach facts," he told the audience of educators and parents. "It's to nurture wonder. When a child asks why, don't just give them an answer. Help them discover it. And never ever tell them something is too complicated for them to understand. If you can't explain it simply, that's on you, not them." In his dressing room before that evening's show, Jimmy was going through his monologue when he received a package. Inside was a hand-drawn card with a somewhat lopsided rocket ship on the front. He opened it to find a message in careful, childish handwriting. "Thank you for having me on your show. I had fun. P.S. I'm practicing drawing horses." It was signed simply X, with a small drawing of what might have been a horse, though it looked more like a dog with a long neck. Jimmy smiled and propped the card on his dressing table. Later that night, during his monologue, he mentioned it briefly. "I got a thank you note today from the smartest guest I've ever had," he told the audience. "And let me tell you, in this business, thank you notes are rare." Adults could learn a lot from this kid. The audience applauded, many of them having seen the viral interview either live or in the clips that had circulated afterward. "We've had a lot of memorable moments on this show over the years," Jimmy continued. "But what happened last week was special. It wasn't just entertaining, though it certainly was that. It was a reminder that sometimes the most profound insights come from the most unexpected sources." He paused, uncharacteristically thoughtful for a monologue segment. And it was a reminder for all of us adults to listen more carefully to the children in our lives. They're paying attention, they're making connections, and sometimes, he grinned, they're just waiting for the perfect moment to hit you with a science joke that puts yours to shame. The audience laughed and applauded again. "So here's to Musk," Jimmy concluded, raising his coffee mug in a toast, "who made me look like an amateur on my own show, and who I'm pretty sure will be either running the world or saving it someday. Possibly both." In the months that followed, the interview would be referenced in discussions about education reform, parenting philosophies, and even in academic papers about public communication of scientific concepts. It became one of those cultural touchpoints that resonated far beyond its original context. And for X himself, it became just another experience in a childhood filled with unique opportunities and extraordinary moments. Significant, yes, but ultimately less important than the daily conversations with his father about how the world worked and how it might be made better. Years later, when asked about his early brush with fame, he would smile and say simply, "It was just a conversation. The best learning always happens through conversation." A lesson he had learned not from his moment in the spotlight, but from all those ordinary moments at home, asking questions about neural networks, rockets, and the mysteries of the universe, and having those questions taken seriously by the adults in his life.